Pennsylvania sits on top of more sealed, flooded, and forbidden underground space than almost any other state in the country. Beneath its cities, its hills, and its former coal fields lie tunnels that have not seen daylight in decades, rooms that were sealed after disasters that killed hundreds of men, and federal facilities so classified that their very existence was a government secret for most of the 20th century. This video counts down 9 real underground places in Pennsylvania, from a mine beneath the Susquehanna River where 12 men have been sealed since 1959, to a military command complex blasted into solid rock to serve as a backup Pentagon in the event of a nuclear war. Every site on this list is documented in federal records, state mining archives, Department of Energy disclosures, or historical accounts that have been publicly confirmed by the agencies that manage them. Stay with me to the end, because the final site on this list sits beneath one of the most densely populated corridors in the northeastern United States, actively maintained by the Secret Service, and has been continuously operational since the 1940s. Let's begin. Beneath the rolling farmland and forested ridges of western Pennsylvania, in an area known to historians as the Westmoreland County Coalfields, the Dar Mine once stood as one of the more productive operations in a region defined entirely by coal. On the morning of December 19, 1907, at roughly 11:30, a gas explosion tore through the mine's workings with enough force to be felt miles away, killing 239 men and boys in what remains the deadliest single mining disaster in Pennsylvania history. The recovery effort that followed was among the most difficult of its era. Many of the dead had been so thoroughly destroyed by the initial blast that matching remains to names was impossible, a grim accounting compounded by the fact that a significant portion of the workforce was made up of recent immigrants from Central and Eastern Europe whose employment records, if they existed at all, were often incomplete. A number of men who died in the Dar Mine were ultimately buried without their identities ever being confirmed, laid to rest beside those whose names were known in a church cemetery near the mine, anonymous even in death. A state historical marker now stands near the site, at the intersection of a rural Pennsylvania road and the church cemetery where many of the dead were buried. The mine itself, sealed in the months following the disaster and never reopened, still lies beneath the surrounding Pennsylvania hills today, its passages permanently closed, its history preserved only in the county records, newspaper archives, and family memories of a community that lost nearly every working man it had in a single morning. In 1869, the Avondale Mine in Plymouth Township, Luzerne County, became the site of what was then the deadliest mining disaster in American history. On the morning of September 6th, a fire broke out in the mine's wooden ventilation furnace, the only means of moving fresh air through the underground workings. The fire consumed the wooden shaft lining and the breaker structure at the surface almost simultaneously, cutting off the mine's only entrance and its only ventilation system in a single event that took less than an hour to make the mine completely inaccessible. 110 men and boys were working underground when the fire started. Rescue teams made repeated attempts to descend the burning shaft over the following hours, and at least 2 rescuers died in the attempts. By the time the fire was controlled enough to allow entry, it was clear that everyone below had suffocated, killed not by the flames, but by the absence of air. The bodies were recovered over the following days, a process of grim identification that drew mourners from across the region. The Avondale disaster had an immediate and lasting political effect. It prompted the Pennsylvania legislature to pass the first comprehensive mine safety law in the United States, requiring, among other things, that all underground coal mines have at least 2 separate means of egress. The mine itself was sealed after the recovery was completed and was never worked again. The site is today a Pennsylvania State Historical Marker location, with the sealed underground workings remaining beneath private land that has never been formally reopened for any purpose. On November 1st, 1960, the pumps maintaining the water level in the underground mines beneath Lackawanna County, Pennsylvania, were shut down permanently. For decades, Those pumps had been the only thing preventing the groundwater naturally seeping into the anthracite coal mines beneath Scranton from filling them entirely. When the pumping stopped, the water rose steadily, and by 1962, the flooded underground workings had reached equilibrium at a level roughly 600 feet above sea level, leaving an enormous, permanently flooded underground reservoir directly beneath one of the largest cities in northeastern Pennsylvania. The consequences appeared almost immediately at the surface. As water saturated the ground around the old mine pillars and the abandoned room and pillar workings began to lose their structural integrity, sections of Scranton began to sink. Large subsidence holes opened in streets and backyards with no warning. Whole neighborhoods reported the ground settling beneath them, causing structural damage to buildings that had stood for generations. A Wall Street Journal article from the period described Scranton as a city built on toothpicks. Today, the flooded mine pool beneath Scranton and the surrounding Lackawanna Valley remains in place, inaccessible, and permanently sealed below the city's foundations. Ongoing monitoring programs track the mine pool's water levels and the continuing risk of ground subsidence, and limited geothermal projects have attempted to use the mine water's consistent temperature for heating purposes. But the underground itself, a vast flooded network of tunnels, rooms, and shafts that once employed tens of thousands of miners across multiple generations, has not been seen by any human being since the water rose to fill it more than 60 years ago. On January 22, 1959, the Susquehanna River broke through the thin rock roof of an active anthracite mine near the village of Port Griffith in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, after the mine's own management had deliberately thinned that rock ceiling to well below the minimum safe thickness in an attempt to extract every last possible ton of coal from beneath the riverbed. Water poured into the mine through the breach with such force that it created a visible whirlpool on the surface of the river above. 69 miners escaped through emergency shafts and interconnected passages in the hours that followed. 12 did not. 3 days of desperate effort by crews dumping railroad cars and smaller mine cars directly into the breach eventually slowed the flow enough to plug it, and an estimated 10 billion gallons of river water permanently filled the interconnected mine workings beneath the valley. The 12 men who did not escape were never recovered from the flooded passages where they died, and the mine disaster effectively ended large-scale anthracite coal mining in the northern Pennsylvania coal fields almost overnight. The Knox Coal Company officials who had ordered the excavation beneath the riverbed were later indicted on charges of involuntary manslaughter, and several were convicted. But for the families of the 12 men still underground, no conviction brought any change to the fact that their husbands, fathers, and sons remain sealed beneath the Susquehanna River to this day in a flooded mine that the state of Pennsylvania has never attempted to reopen. In May of 1962, a landfill fire in the small anthracite town of Centralia found its way through an unsealed opening into the abandoned coal mines running beneath the entire community. The fire spread into the mine workings, and despite multiple attempts over the following decades to extinguish it, using everything from clay slurry injections to large-scale excavation, was never fully contained. By the 1980s, carbon monoxide levels underground had become severe enough that the federal government allocated more than $40 million to relocate Centralia's residents, and in 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania condemned virtually every remaining property in the town through eminent domain. Most residents accepted the buyout and relocated. A small handful refused and fought the condemnation through the courts, eventually reaching agreements allowing them to remain in their homes for the rest of their natural lives with the understanding that the state would take ownership of the properties upon their deaths. Today, fewer than 5 people remain in Centralia, living among empty streets, absent neighbors, and steam vents that occasionally crack open in the earth above the burning coal seams below. By every official estimate available, the fire is still burning today, somewhere beneath what remains of Centralia, more than 6 decades after it started. Government models suggest it could continue burning for another 2 centuries if left unaddressed. The underground itself, the passages where the fire continues spreading through unworked coal seams, has been inaccessible since the condemnation and is not subject to any current remediation effort, a burning underground space beneath a town that the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has legally dissolved.
In the limestone hills of Butler County, Pennsylvania, roughly 50 miles north of Pittsburgh, an old limestone mine has been converted into one of the most secure underground records facilities in the United States. The facility at Boyers operates as the National Personnel Records Center's underground archives, storing millions of military and civilian government records in conditions provided by the constant cool temperature and stable humidity of a limestone mine environment, an underground setting that preserves paper documents far more reliably than any above-ground warehouse could manage. The broader Iron Mountain Commercial Storage Network that operates at the same location has become one of the most important underground record storage facilities in the country, used by both federal agencies and private corporations to house documents, data backups, and irreplaceable archival materials in a setting considered far more resistant to fire, flood, and other surface-level disasters than ordinary storage. A catastrophic fire at a related federal records facility in St. Louis in 1973 destroyed millions of irreplaceable military service files, a disaster that underscored precisely why underground limestone storage matters, and that has never fully been recovered from. Access to the government portions of the Boyers facility is restricted exclusively to authorized federal personnel, with independent or public entry not permitted. The mine, which extends more than 200 feet below the surface and encompasses over 1 million square feet of storage space across multiple interconnected sections, maintains its own underground road network, allowing small vehicles to move between sections of the facility without returning to the surface.
Across northeastern Pennsylvania, the legacy of more than 2 centuries of underground anthracite coal mining has left behind thousands of abandoned mine shafts, flooded tunnels, and subsidence zones that the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation has been working to inventory, monitor, and where possible, remediate for decades. The state estimates between 10,000 and 15,000 abandoned underground coal mines exist within Pennsylvania, the majority of them flooded, many with no complete records of their extent, and some in locations where their precise underground footprints have never been fully mapped. The most persistent hazard produced by these abandoned workings is the phenomenon of acid mine drainage, in which water percolating through abandoned mines picks up sulfur compounds from the surrounding coal seams and emerges at surface streams as a highly acidic, mineral-laden discharge that turns affected waterways vivid shades of orange and red, a color unmistakable to anyone who has driven through the coal regions of central and northeastern Pennsylvania. More than 2,000 miles of Pennsylvania's streams are estimated to be affected by acid mine drainage from abandoned underground workings. The underground spaces themselves, which in total represent one of the largest networks of sealed, inaccessible excavated space in the eastern United States, are not entered or inspected under any normal circumstances, monitored instead through surface borehole measurements, satellite imaging of subsidence patterns, and stream chemistry monitoring that tracks what is leaching out of them. They remain, in effect, the largest sealed underground environment in Pennsylvania, inaccessible to the public not because of any specific prohibition, but because the spaces are flooded, structurally unstable, or both.
In the mountains of south-central Pennsylvania, on the Pennsylvania side of the Mason-Dixon line, Raven Rock Mountain holds a military command complex that has been known to security researchers and journalists since at least the 1950s, but whose operational details have never been made available to the public. Construction of the complex, sometimes referred to as Site R or the Alternate Joint Communications Center, began in 1951 under President Harry Truman, who authorized the excavation of an underground facility inside solid greenstone rock, specifically to serve as a hardened relocation site for the Pentagon and military command staff in the event of a nuclear attack on Washington. The complex consists of several interconnected 3-story buildings, constructed inside a vast underground cavern. supported by the surrounding rock rather than built on a conventional foundation, and equipped with its own independent power generation, water supply, and ventilation systems capable of sustaining full operations for extended periods without any contact with the outside. Local residents in the surrounding Pennsylvania countryside have known about the facility for decades, referring to it colloquially as Harry's Hole, a name that reflects its origins and its studied self-concealment within a landscape that otherwise looks like ordinary South Mountain farmland and forest. Raven Rock has only had its real-world emergency utility, tested once in public knowledge, when Vice President Dick Cheney was relocated there following the September 11th attacks, while officials maintained uncertainty about whether additional strikes were planned against Washington. The facility is fully staffed and operational today, continuously maintained and never opened to public access in any form, one of the most important and least publicly known facilities in the entire federal emergency management infrastructure.
Beneath the street grid of Washington, D.C., and extending under a stretch of Pennsylvania Avenue that has been among the most heavily traveled and most closely watched streets in the country since the 1940s, a tunnel connects the White House to the Treasury Building immediately to its east, a passage constructed in secret in December of 1941, within days of the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The tunnel was built specifically to give the president a hardened underground escape route in the event of an aerial bombing raid on the Capitol, connecting the White House basement to the Treasury Building's deep granite vault foundation, which was considered a substantially safer refuge than the White House's shallow basement in the event of a direct strike. The finished passage runs 761 feet and was deliberately designed in a zigzag rather than a straight line, a structural choice intended to reduce the propagation of a bomb's concussive force through the tunnel's length. Rooms along its path were originally fitted with cots and emergency supplies, allowing the tunnel to serve as a shelter as well as an escape route, and a 10-room emergency suite was eventually constructed 2 floors below the Treasury's main cash room, specifically to house the president and his staff if they needed to use the passage under actual wartime conditions. The tunnel remains active today, maintained by the Secret Service and continuously monitored by cameras and electronic security systems. It is the only underground passage in the country known with certainty to be under 24-hour armed protection as a matter of standing operational procedure rather than a response to any specific threat, a passage running directly beneath one of the most photographed and most publicly visible streets in the world, used by millions of visitors every year, none of whom have any access to what lies beneath the sidewalk they are standing on. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, let us know in the comments which of these places surprised you the most, and we'll see you in the next one.